Welcome to Scoli Sleep Stories. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable, let the day soften around you, and settle in for a calm documentary made for curious minds. If these stories help you rest, learn, or simply enjoy a quieter part of the day, please consider liking this episode and subscribing to the channel. Now, when you are ready, let us begin. Chapter 1: A Quiet World of Glass. Morning enters a room by degrees. At first, there is only a pale brightness at the window. Then a quiet band of daylight reaches across the floor. It touches the leg of a chair, the edge of a table, and a drinking glass left beside a small jar. Nothing in the room seems unusual. The window is simply there, separating the still indoor air from the cooler air outside. The glass on the table waits to be filled. The jar may hold tea leaves, flour, or a spoonful of preserves. Yet much of the room has been shaped by glass. There may be a mirror on the wall, and a clock with a clear cover over its face. A lamp may stand in one corner, its light enclosed by a shade or globe. Eyeglasses rest beside a book. A dark screen catches a faint reflection before it is switched on. Glass may appear in an oven door, on the shelves of a cupboard, in light fixtures overhead, and in bottles holding oil, medicine, or water. These objects are so familiar that the material itself often goes unnoticed. Glass is present, but it rarely asks for attention. Much of its usefulness depends on this quietness. A clean window seems almost to disappear. We look through it toward a street, a garden, a field, or a neighboring wall. The pane remains between us and the world, keeping out rain, wind, dust, and direct touch, while allowing light to pass. This simple arrangement changed everyday life profoundly. A window can admit daylight without leaving a room open to the weather. A bottle can hold a liquid while allowing its color and level to be seen. A lens can guide light in a controlled way, helping an eye focus on words or small details. Around these three broad abilities, glass became woven into daily life. It admitted light, it contained and preserved substances, and it improved sight. Through these uses, glass gradually found a place in homes, trades, travel, medicine, learning, and public streets. The change did not happen at once. There was no single morning when the world suddenly became a world of glass. Its influence accumulated over many generations. Recipes were adjusted, furnaces became more capable, craftspeople found new ways to shape the hot material. Fuel supplies, trade, architecture, manufacturing, and cost all played their parts. For long periods, glass remained beside older and equally useful materials. There were ceramic jars, wooden boxes, leather flasks, metal vessels, thin pieces of horn, solid shutters, and open flames. New materials did not simply sweep the old ones away. Instead, people chose among them, using each where it served best. Even now, glass is not one perfectly uniform substance. The ordinary glass used for many windows, bottles, and jars usually belongs to a family called soda, lime, silica glass. The name reflects its three main parts. Silica forms the basic network of the material. It is abundant in sand, though glassmakers need suitable raw materials rather than just any sand gathered at hand. Soda lowers the temperature needed to work the mixture. Lime improves the durability of the finished glass, especially its resistance to water. The fuller story of glassmaking belongs to furnaces and workshops, and to the next part of our journey. For now, it's enough to notice the material's broad qualities. When heated properly, glass can be shaped. When it cools, it becomes hard. It is generally non-porous, and it can be transparent or translucent. At room temperature, glass behaves as an amorphous solid. The word amorphous means that its inner structure does not form the regular repeating arrangement found in a crystal. Glass is sometimes described as a liquid that moves with extraordinary slowness. But that familiar idea is not accurate. Old window panes can be uneven, with ripples and variations in thickness. These features come from historic methods of manufacture. The glass has not flowed downward over the centuries. Its wavering surface preserves signs of an earlier workshop, not the slow movement of the pane itself. A modern drinking glass, by contrast, may be smooth and even. Lifted from the table, it feels cool in the hand. If it contains cold water, a little moisture may gather on the outside and leave a soft ring beneath it. The vessel is hard, relatively non-porous, and easy to rinse. Because it is transparent, the water can be inspected without being poured out. A bottle or jar offers the same practical advantage. Its contents can often be seen before the lid is opened. One can notice the level of oil, the color of juice, the clarity of a medicine, or the amount of grain remaining in a cupboard. Glass resists many chemicals, and its surface does not readily allow substances to pass through it. Still, a glass container alone cannot guarantee preservation. Food and medicine also require suitable closures, clean handling, and proper storage. A jar works together with its lid, just as a bottle depends on a sound cap, stopper, or cork. Near the jar, small reflections appear and disappear as the daylight shifts. The rim catches a bright line. A curve in the glass bends the image of the room behind it. Seen through the side of a bottle, a chair leg may seem narrower, while the edge of the window wavers gently. Not every piece of glass is clear. Glass may be translucent, allowing light through without providing a distinct view. It can be frosted, tinted, colored, or patterned. Historic glass was often bubbled, uneven, cloudy, or filled with subtle shades. Some colors were deliberate. Others came from the minerals and methods involved in making the glass. Such a pane could brighten a room while leaving the outside world softened and indistinct. This brings us to one of the quiet balances created by windows. Glass permits daylight and views, but visibility travels in both directions. A person indoors may look out, while someone outside may look in. Curtains, blinds, shutters, frosting, and tinting help adjust that relationship. At 1 hour, a window opens the room visually toward the landscape. At another, a curtain restores privacy and a sense of enclosure. Across the room, a mirror offers a different kind of brightness. It seems to return the room to itself. The window, the table, and the person standing nearby all appear within its surface. But a modern mirror is not merely a piece of transparent glass. Behind the glass is a reflective metallic layer. Light passes through the front, reaches that layer, and is reflected back. The glass provides a smooth, protective surface through which the reflection can be seen. A mirror can make an interior appear deeper. A small lamp reflected in it becomes a second glow. It also makes it easy to study a face, adjust clothing, or bring more reflected light into a room. When evening comes, another glass object becomes more noticeable. A lamp glows behind glass that is almost invisible. The glass allows the light to spread, while shielding what lies within from touch and moving air. In lamps and lanterns that use a flame, a glass enclosure protects that flame from drafts. A carefully shaped lamp chimney can also help it burn more steadily. In this way, useful evening hours could gently expand. The change came not through light alone, but through light managed and protected by glass. Glass often seems durable because it can withstand water, weather, and many substances that might stain or weaken other materials. Yet it is not beyond change. Glass may corrode under certain conditions. Its surface may become delicately iridescent. It can crack and it can shatter. Its strength and fragility exist together. A window may endure years of rain, yet break under a sharp impact. A bottle may carry liquid safely over a long journey, then slip from a hand onto stone. People have therefore learned not only to make glass, but also to frame it, cushion it, divide it into panes, strengthen it, and place it where its qualities are most useful. In the modern room, all of this accumulated knowledge rests quietly among ordinary things. Daylight continues across the floor. The mirror holds a pale square of window. The jar gives back a few small points of brightness. The lamp waits for evening. And on the table, the clear drinking glass seems simple enough to have no history at all. Yet beneath its smooth rim lies a patient story of changing recipes, steady furnaces, trade, experiment, and practiced hands. The finished object leads backward toward mineral powders, pale grains of sand, and the glow of heat. Long before glass became nearly invisible in an everyday room, it began in brightness and fire. There, through gradual effort, ancient makers learned that familiar minerals could be transformed into something hard, luminous, and new. Chapter 2: Sand, Heat, and the First Glassmakers. Long before clear panes admitted daylight into ordinary rooms, glass began with materials that seemed quite unlike glass. There were pale grains of sand, pieces of crushed quartz, mineral salts, plant ash, limestone, and shell. Each was dry, dull, and separate. Yet when these materials were carefully chosen, measured, combined, and heated for long enough, they could become a glowing substance with entirely new qualities. The most important ingredient was silica. Silica can come from sand or from crushed quartz, a common hard mineral. It forms the main structure of glass, rather as timber forms the frame of a house. But silica alone requires extremely intense heat before it becomes easy to work. Early glassmakers therefore added an alkali, a substance that helped the silica soften and react within the heat their furnaces could sustain. In some places, the alkali came from mineral soda, including natron. Elsewhere, makers burned certain plants and used their soda-rich ash. Calcium was also useful because it helped make the finished glass more durable. It could come from limestone or from tiny fragments of shell already present in the sand. The recipe sounds simple when reduced to a few quiet sentences. In practice, it required considerable judgment. Not every sand offered the same mixture. Plant ash varied according to the plants from which it came. The furnace had to become hot enough, remain hot, and hold its heat with reasonable steadiness. Exact working temperatures differed according to the recipe and the furnace. Early glass, then, was not simply beach sand placed in an ordinary fire. It depended upon a suitable mixture and sustained, controlled heat. Within a well-tended furnace, the dry ingredients gradually changed. The sharp outlines of individual grains disappeared. Powders reacted with one another. A pale heap of separate materials became a softened, glowing mass. Glass had existed in nature long before people learned to manufacture it. Obsidian, formed through volcanic activity, is one example of natural glass. Its dark, glossy surface would have been familiar in places where it could be found. Manufactured glass was a different achievement. It required people to gather raw ingredients, combine them deliberately, and control their transformation. No surviving account identifies one inventor, one workshop, or one precise moment when this knowledge first appeared. The origin of manufactured glass remains uncertain. It is possible that glassmaking developed through experience with pottery, faience, or metalworking. In those crafts, people already observed minerals changing under heat. They tended furnaces, prepared mixtures, and saw glossy surfaces appear. Glass may have emerged from such observations, yet the familiar idea of a single accidental discovery remains only a theory. It is plausible, but unproven. The true beginning may have been gradual. A mixture behaved one way, and a maker remembered. A furnace was tended differently, and the result improved. An ingredient was measured more carefully. Useful knowledge passed from one pair of practiced hands to another. Over time, repetition turned scattered observations into a craft. Early evidence of manufactured glass appears in Mesopotamia and Egypt, although the surviving pieces do not tell a complete story. Rough fragments are known from around the early 2nd millennium BCE, with possible earlier experiments. By roughly the middle of that millennium, glass vessels were securely established. Even then, glass was far from an ordinary household material. It required suitable ingredients, fuel, steady heat, skilled labor, and time. Its value differed by place and period, but early glass was generally specialized and often elite. It was something to notice and preserve, rather than something to overlook on a table or windowsill. Many early glass objects were small. There were beads, pendants, inlays, amulets, and little containers for cosmetics, scented oils, and other precious substances. Set upon woven cloth, a row of blue glass beads might resemble drops of the evening sky. Fitted into another object, a polished inlay could provide a smooth point of brightness. A pendant or amulet could be held in the palm, its color deep and luminous. Those colors were often intentional. Early glass was not always meant to be clear. Makers produced intense blues, whites, yellows, and other shades. Deep blue glass could imitate lapis lazuli, a valued colorful stone. Pale lines could cross a darker body. Contrasting colors could form orderly patterns around a small vessel. To modern eyes, strong color or opacity may seem like an imperfect attempt at transparency. For early makers, however, color was often the purpose. Glass could resemble prized stones while also allowing patterns and combinations of its own. Its beauty did not depend upon being clear. It could glow softly in blue, shine in yellow, or appear calm and pale in white. The work could also be divided between different places. Raw glass might be made in one workshop, where the original ingredients were combined and heated. After cooling, that glass could be moved as chunks or ingots. In another workshop, perhaps far away, it could be reheated and shaped into finished objects. This gives us a useful distinction. Glassmaking creates glass from raw materials. Glass working reheats and shapes glass that has already been made. The two activities called for related knowledge, but they did not always happen in the same place. Imagine one of these early workshops near the end of a long working day. The orange mouth of the furnace glows steadily. Nearby are shallow containers holding pieces of raw glass. Simple tools rest within reach. The room is marked by repeated movements, familiar to those who work there. A maker watches the heat and studies the changing material. Glass must be warm enough to yield, yet controlled enough to shape. The craft depends upon careful timing. The maker turns a small object, returns it to the warmth, and waits until the material is ready for the next movement. A bead might be formed around a rod. An inlay might be prepared for its place in a larger design. A small hollow vessel required a slower and more demanding method. Before glass blowing became known, many small vessels were created by core forming. First, the maker prepared a removable core, often from a mixture of clay, sand, and organic material. The core represented the empty space that would eventually lie inside the vessel. Hot glass was then built around it. Layer by layer, the core received its glass covering. Threads of contrasting glass could be added to the surface and drawn into rippling or feathered patterns. Whenever the material became too firm to shape, it could be warmed again. The neck and rim were formed with care. The vessel remained small enough to handle, yet every part asked for attention. When the work was complete and the glass had cooled, the inner core was loosened and removed through the narrow opening. What remained was a hollow container, created around a space that had first been solid. Now the little vessel could rest. The orange glow faded, and its colors became easier to see. Perhaps the body was deep blue, crossed by pale lines that wandered gently from side to side. Perhaps it stood no higher than a hand, with a narrow mouth and a rounded body. Such a container suited substances used in small amounts. It might hold scented oil, a cosmetic, or another precious preparation. Its narrow opening allowed the contents to be poured carefully. The vessel was practical, but it was also an object of deliberate beauty. It gathered many forms of knowledge into one small shape. Someone had collected or prepared the raw materials. Someone had tended the furnace and judged the heat. Glassmakers had created the glass, and glass workers had softened and shaped it. Chunks or ingots may have traveled between workshops before the finished vessel traveled again. At last, the small patterned container might be placed on woven cloth, beside beads, pendants, or other valued things. Its surface would catch the nearby light without becoming transparent. The deep color would be part of its meaning and its appeal. Glass was still rare, labor-intensive, and precious. It had not yet spread into ordinary windows, common bottles, or the countless clear objects of daily life. For now it belonged to a slower world of measured ingredients, steady furnaces, long practice, and small, carefully finished forms. Yet the material already held many possibilities. It could imitate a colorful stone. It could carry a smooth pattern. It could surround and protect a small amount of scented oil. And, unlike an inlay or a bead, the little vessel possessed an interior. That inner space had been made patiently around a removable core. Once the core was gone, the narrow opening led into a hollow chamber, ready to hold something precious. In a later age, glass workers would learn another way to create such a space. They would gather softened glass at the end of a pipe, turn it before the orange furnace, and form the hollow vessel from within, using one of the simplest and quietest forces the body can offer. Chapter 3. The Breath That Shaped a Bottle. A measured breath entered the glass through a narrow metal pipe. At first, almost nothing seemed to happen. The glowing mass at the far end of the pipe remained rounded and heavy, like a drop of honey made bright by heat. Then within it, a small hollow appeared. That hollow opened a new chapter in the history of glass. The earliest closely datable evidence for inflated glass comes from the Syro-Palestinian region, along the eastern Mediterranean, around the middle of the 1st century BCE. The exact beginnings are not completely known. Ancient vessels, broken fragments, tools, and workshop remains provide important clues. Modern glassworkers and archaeologists also use careful experiments to reconstruct how certain objects may have been formed. Some movements left no written record. They survived instead in the balance of the pipe, the timing of a breath, and the knowledge passed from one practiced worker to another. From the eastern Mediterranean, glassblowing spread rapidly through the Roman world. It is often associated with Roman glass because blown vessels became common under Roman rule and traveled widely along broad trade networks. Yet the craft drew heavily upon the knowledge and experience of Eastern Mediterranean glassmakers. It should not be understood as an exclusively Roman invention. Like many useful skills, glassblowing developed in a region where materials, workers, merchants, and ideas had long moved from place to place. Its spread was gradual, carried by practiced hands and by communities that recognized the possibilities within a small bubble of air. Inside a glass workshop, the furnace cast a steady orange glow. Its heat softened prepared glass until it became workable. Nearby, a glassblower held a long hollow metal tube called a blowpipe. One end remained cool enough to handle. The other was placed near the molten glass and slowly turned. As the pipe rotated, a gathering of glass collected around its tip. This first step was known simply as gathering. It required judgment. Too little glass might not provide enough material for the intended vessel. Too much could become difficult to control. The worker watched the size of the gather and felt its weight through the length of the pipe. And the pipe kept turning. This continuous motion was essential. Softened glass responded to gravity. If the worker stopped turning for too long, the warm mass could sag too far to one side. By rotating the pipe, the glassblower kept the material centered and allowed gravity to act more evenly. The movement was not frantic. It was steady and attentive. Hands guided the pipe. Eyes observed the glow. The body remained aware of the furnace, the weight of the glass, and the passing moments in which the material was soft enough to shape. Once the gather was ready, the glassblower introduced a small breath through the hollow pipe. Air traveled down the tube and formed a bubble inside the softened glass. The breath did not need to be sudden or forceful. It needed to be controlled. A small hollow could then be enlarged little by little. Gather, breathe, turn. The glass began to cool whenever it was removed from the furnace. As it cooled, it stiffened, so the worker returned it to the heat, continuing to rotate the pipe while the glass became soft again. This cycle could be repeated many times. The furnace restored softness. The surrounding air gradually took it away. Reheat, turn, and shape. With the glass softened once more, the worker could enlarge the bubble. Gravity might draw the vessel into a longer form when the pipe was held downward. Turning helped keep the body balanced. Tools could narrow one part, widen another, flatten a base, or prepare the place where the finished vessel would eventually separate from the pipe. The glassblower did not work by breath alone. The final form emerged through breath, heat, gravity, turning, tools, and long practice. Each had a part to play, and each had to be used at the proper moment. Glassblowing often depended upon teamwork as well. One person might manage the main pipe, while another assisted with tools, prop materials, or helped transfer the vessel. Larger or more delicate objects could require several practiced workers. The workshop was active, but it did not need to be disorderly. Its pace followed the needs of the glass. Molten material could not be left unattended, yet it could not be hurried beyond what its temperature allowed. The work proceeded in a controlled rhythm, marked by the furnace glow and the slow turning of the pipe. Some vessels were made free-blown. In this method, the bubble was shaped mainly by movement, gravity, tools, and controlled breath. Free-blowing allowed considerable variety. A rounded body might become a flask. A longer body might become a bottle. The opening could be widened into a cup, or the neck could remain narrow for pouring and storage. Other vessels were mold-blown. For these, the glassworker placed the warm bubble inside a mold and inflated it until the glass pressed against the mold's inner surface. The mold guided the outline and could create repeated shapes or decorations. It also made it easier to produce a number of vessels with similar forms. Free-blown glass offered flexibility. Mold-blown glass offered repetition. Neither method answered every need, and older techniques did not disappear when glassblowing spread. Casting continued wherever it suited the object being made. Crafts rarely replaced one another all at once. More often, old and new methods remained side by side. Each is chosen for the forms it can create and the purpose the finished object is meant to serve. When the body of a blown vessel was nearly complete, its mouth was still attached to the blowpipe. To finish the rim, the vessel could be transferred to a pontil, a solid rod temporarily attached to its base. The glassworker then separated the neck from the blowpipe. Held from below by the pontil, the vessel could be reheated once more. Its rough opening could be trimmed and shaped into a smooth rim. A narrow neck might be prepared for a stopper. A lip might be formed to make pouring easier. When this work was complete, the vessel was detached from the pontil, sometimes leaving a small mark on its base. Even then, it was not ready for immediate use. The glass needed to cool gradually and evenly. In a warm chamber, its temperature slowly fell. The orange glow faded. The soft walls became firm. A material that had moved and stretched beneath the worker's tools settled into a hard and lasting shape. Compared with many earlier ways of making hollow glass vessels, blowing was faster and more versatile. It allowed thinner walls and a wider range of forms. A hollow body could be expanded with air, rather than formed slowly around a removable core. Glassmakers could produce cups, jugs, bottles, flasks, and storage containers in greater numbers. This did not mean that blown glass immediately became affordable to everyone. Furnaces, fuel, raw materials, transport, and skilled labor still carried costs. Fine pieces could remain valuable. Glass blowing itself required extensive practice, careful heat control, and close cooperation among workers. Yet over time, glass vessels became much more common than they had been in earlier centuries. Across the trade networks of the Roman world, blown glass moved between workshops, markets, homes, and places of healing. Some vessels were plain and practical, others were colored, patterned, or carefully decorated. A small flask might hold perfume or medicine. A bottle might carry oil or wine. A jug could stand upon a table, ready for pouring. A cup might reveal the color of the drink within it. A storage container could keep its contents gathered in one smooth, durable space. The forms varied, but each began with a similar sequence: gather, breathe, turn, reheat, shape. Behind every surviving vessel were movements that can no longer be seen directly. Ancient objects and workshop remains preserve the results, but some exact gestures must be reconstructed through experiment. The angle of the pipe, the length of each reheating, and the force of a breath belong to the knowledge of the worker. Even so, the vessel still carries traces of its making. A slight curve may suggest the pull of gravity. A repeated pattern may show that the glass once expanded inside a mold. A small mark beneath the base may record the place where the pontil was attached. The finished object became firm, but its shape remembered a time when it was warm and moving. And so the measured breath of the workshop traveled outward into daily life. It became the hollow center of useful things. Near the furnace, a newly finished flask rested in gentle warmth. Its body was thin and faintly colored, with a narrow neck and a small mark beneath its base. A short while before, it had been a glowing gather turning at the end of a pipe. Now it cooled quietly, becoming firm and ready to leave the maker's hands. Soon it might be stoppered and placed in a basket. It might cross a market square or follow a road toward a distant town. Wherever it went, its empty interior waited for its next purpose. It might hold oil, wine, perfume, or medicine. It might stand on a shelf, travel with a merchant, or rest near the hand of someone preparing a remedy. The glassblower's work was finished, but the useful life of the vessel had only begun. Within its cooling walls, the quiet space formed by breath was ready to keep something valuable safely gathered. Chapter 4: Bottles and the Art of Keeping Things. Imagine the newly cooled flask leaving the glassmaker's workshop in a padded basket. Its faintly green walls catch the morning light as it travels through narrow streets, past open doors and shaded market stalls. Before long, it reaches a merchant's shop, where shelves rise along the wall in orderly rows. Some vessels are round and broad. Others are slender, with long necks and thick rims. A few contain golden oil, dark wine, or reddish syrup. Smaller bottles hold perfume or carefully prepared medicine. Their colors and shapes differ, yet each performs the same quiet task. It keeps a portion of something gathered safely in one place. The art of keeping things may seem simple. Place a liquid in a container, close the opening and set it aside. But every part of that process matters. The walls must hold the contents without leaking. The mouth must allow filling and pouring. The closure must remain in place. And the person handling the vessel must keep it as clean and secure as circumstances allow. Glass offered several useful qualities for this work. Its walls were relatively non-porous, meaning that liquids did not easily pass into them. Glass also did not readily absorb odors or flavors. Once a bottle had been emptied and carefully washed, it could often be used again without carrying much trace of what it had held before. In a quiet pantry, someone might rinse a jar with clean water, turn it upside down on a cloth, and leave it to dry. Later, the jar could receive a new supply of oil, syrup, or another valued substance. Bottles were rarely treated as objects to be used only once. For much of history, they required too much labor and expense for that. They were returned, refilled, exchanged, and carried home again. A sturdy bottle might pass through many hands before it finally cracked, broke, or was discarded. Glass had another helpful quality. It allowed people to look inside. A clear or translucent bottle could reveal the level of its contents without being opened. A merchant could hold it toward the light and inspect the color of an oil. An apothecary, a person who prepared and sold medicines, could watch for sediment resting at the bottom of a flask. Someone in a household could see how much syrup remained, or notice that a liquid no longer looked as it once had. This visibility did not guarantee purity, freshness, or honest labeling. A liquid might appear clear and still be unsuitable. A bottle might contain something different from what a seller claimed. Yet the ability to inspect color, level, and sediment offered information that an opaque container could not provide. The bottle's wall protected what was inside, while still permitting a quiet kind of observation. Other containers remained useful, of course, and glass did not replace them all. Pottery vessels had long carried food and drink, and skilled potters could shape it into jars, jugs, bowls, and large storage vessels. Properly packed ceramic containers could be practical and durable during transport. They were often less costly than glass, especially in periods when glassmaking demanded specialized furnaces, valuable materials, and highly trained labor. Unglazed pottery could absorb some liquid. A glaze, which was a smooth, glass-like coating fired onto the clay, could make the interior less porous. Glass needed no separate glaze to create its relatively non-porous surface. It also revealed its contents. Yet pottery was often less costly, while glass was more fragile and vulnerable to a careless knock against stone. Leather flasks and wooden vessels offered different advantages. Leather could flex where glass could not. Wood was familiar and useful for containers holding larger quantities of liquid. Yet leather and wood could absorb odors or flavors. They might swell, dry, or change shape with use, and their surfaces could be more difficult to clean thoroughly. Glass did not flex or swell. Its smooth interior could be rinsed and cleaned, but it was heavier than a leather flask of similar size, and a fall that merely marked a wooden vessel might shatter glass. A traveler crossing rough ground might prefer leather. A merchant transporting a large quantity of wine might rely on wood. A household keeping a small amount of fragrant oil might choose glass. Metal vessels had their own strengths. They resisted impact and could survive treatment that would damage a thin bottle. Yet metal hid its contents, and some liquids could take on a metallic taste or react with the vessel. Glass avoided some of these problems, although it lacked metal's toughness. There was no single container best suited to every purpose. The choice depended on cost, distance, weight, contents, and custom. Glass found its place not by being perfect, but by offering a particularly useful balance. It provided a firm, smooth wall that neither readily absorbed the liquid nor completely concealed it. Still, the walls were only part of the vessel. A bottle also had a mouth, and whatever entered through that mouth could leave through it again. Historical glass bottles were closed in many ways. A folded piece of cloth might cover the opening. Reeds or shaped pieces of wood could be pressed into a narrow neck. Clay might be placed around a stopper, while waxed coverings could help resist leaks. In some regions and trades, cork became especially useful. Cork is compressible. When pressed into a bottleneck, It yields slightly, then pushes outward against the glass. This allows it to fit tightly, even when the neck and stopper are not perfectly identical. A cork could help keep liquid in and dust out, but historical closures were not automatically airtight or sterile. A stopper might shrink, loosen, or allow a little air to pass. Wax could crack, cloth could become damp. Careful handling and packing still mattered, particularly when bottles traveled by cart, ship, or pack animal. The shape of a bottle could assist with this work. A narrow neck made pouring easier and reduced the size of the opening that needed to be closed. A broad base helped a vessel stand steadily. Thick glass could offer strength, though it also added weight. The bottle, its opening, and its closure had to work together. Over time, repeated forms became familiar. A certain rounded bottle might suggest wine, while a small flask might be associated with medicine or perfume. Merchants, apothecaries, and customers learned to recognize likely uses from shape, color, and size. Some forms could also suggest a likely quantity or producer. Yet reliable standardization came slowly. Two bottles that looked alike might not hold exactly the same amount. Shapes varied from one workshop or region to another. Even vessels made in the same place could differ, because they were formed by hand. More dependable sizes and measures developed gradually, and at different rates in different places, periods, and trades. Color also became part of a bottle's usefulness. Glass was not always perfectly clear. It might appear dark green, olive, amber, or in other muted shades. Darker glass reduced the amount of light reaching the contents. This could help protect certain beverages and medicines that changed when exposed to too much light. Clear glass made inspection easier, while colored glass offered greater shelter. Once again, the best choice depended on what the bottle was intended to keep, and keeping did not mean preserving forever. Glass alone cannot prevent food or drink from changing. Safe preservation may also depend on cleanliness, acidity, heat treatment, cool storage, refrigeration, or other controls. A well-fitted closure can reduce exposure, but it cannot correct spoiled contents or careless preparation. The vessel, the stopper, and careful handling must work in partnership. This quiet partnership was part of the bottle's usefulness. The walls separated the contents from the room. The narrow mouth allowed measured pouring. The stopper covered the opening. Washing and drying prepared the vessel to be used again. None of these actions was remarkable by itself, yet together they made storage more orderly and dependable. In the pantry, the rinsed jar is now dry. Someone lifts it from the cloth and examines the smooth rim. The jar is filled with dark syrup. A cork is pressed gently into the neck. The outside is wiped clean, a label is added, and the bottle is returned to the shelf. Nearby stand vessels of oil, wine, and medicine. Some are clear enough to show every level and shadow. Others are amber or deep olive, keeping much of the light away. One bottle has been refilled many times. Another has only recently arrived from the shop. Each holds its contents apart from the room, yet not entirely hidden from view. For the merchant, the visible level can help with counting and sale. For the apothecary, color and sediment can offer useful signs. For the household, the bottle can make it easier to see what remains and decide when more will be needed. The glass gives no promise of perfect purity, but it offers the simple advantage of inspection without opening. And so bottles become familiar companions to the quiet work of keeping. They are not always the lightest containers, the least costly, or the most resistant to a fall. Pottery, leather, wood, and metal continue to serve wherever their own qualities are useful. Glass simply takes its place among them, valued for its smoothness, its relatively non-porous walls, and its willingness to let the eye pass through. There the bottles remain in a quiet row, visible yet protected behind their small transparent walls. The room is still. A little daylight touches the curved side of one flask, passes through the pale glass, and rests as a softened patch upon the shelf. Beyond the cabinet, that same daylight meets another wall of glass. This one is broader and flatter, fitted into the house itself. From the small transparent wall of a bottle, our attention can now drift toward the larger transparent wall of a window. Chapter 5. Before the Clear Window. At dawn, the room begins to take shape slowly. For a while, its corners remain in shadow. A wooden chest rests against one wall. Beside it stands a low table with a clay lamp. The lamp has gone out, leaving only the faint scent of yesterday's oil. Across the floor, woven mats still hold the coolness of the night. A bottle waits on a nearby shelf. The first hint of morning touches its curved side, then fades into the dim room. On the outer wall is a small opening closed by a solid wooden shutter. Around its edges appears a narrow line of pale light. Someone crosses the floor and lifts the latch. The shutter opens inward with the soft sound of wood moving against stone. Daylight enters at once, falling in a long, uneven shape across the floor. The room grows brighter. The grain of the table becomes visible along with a folded cloth, a bowl, and the smooth rim of the bottle. Yet the opening admits more than light. Cool air moves through it. From outside come the sounds of birds, footsteps, and distant voices. On another morning, smoke from a nearby fire might drift inside. In summer, insects might follow the warmth. If the sky were heavy with rain, drops could pass through the opening and darken the plaster below. For much of human history, this was the quiet difficulty at the center of every window. How could a household welcome daylight while keeping out what was less welcome? An opening in a wall could make a room more pleasant and useful. It could provide fresh air and offer a view of a courtyard, a street, a field, or a neighboring roof. Yet the same opening interrupted the shelter provided by the wall. Wind, cold, rain, dust, smoke, noise, and small creatures could enter through it. Closing the shutter restored protection, but much of the daylight disappeared. So people learned to manage light through a series of practical choices. They opened shutters when the weather was mild, and closed them when conditions changed. They adjusted cloth coverings, moved screens, and arranged daily work near doors, courtyards, or roof openings. There was no single arrangement used everywhere. Climate, wealth, building type, local materials, and regional customs all shaped what was possible. Many dwellings relied simply on small openings rather than on one universal substitute for glass. In a building arranged around a courtyard, daylight might reach the rooms from a sheltered central space, while the outer walls remained more enclosed. A roof opening could admit light from above. Doorways also brightened interiors, especially where several rooms opened into one another. Elsewhere, wall openings might remain small to limit wind and rain. Thick walls could help protect the interior, while heavy shutters closed the room during rough weather. When more daylight was needed, household tasks could be carried nearer to an open door or beneath the brightest opening. The daily rhythm followed the changing conditions. A shutter might be unlatched in the gentle morning air, drawn partly closed against stronger sunlight, and fastened again when rain approached. The room changed with each movement. It opened to the day, then gathered itself back into shelter. Some coverings allowed a little light to pass even while an opening remained closed. Cloth could soften moving air and admit a faint glow. Woven screens offered shade and privacy, though they could not completely keep out weather. In some places, parchment-like material was stretched across a frame. Prepared animal horn could also be made translucent. Light passed through it, though objects beyond remained indistinct. Thin pieces of translucent stone served a similar purpose in certain buildings, turning direct daylight into a muted radiance. Horn and thin stone, however, were not universal window materials. They depended on available resources, skilled preparation, local customs, and the needs of a particular building. Often there was no translucent covering at all. There was simply a small opening and a shutter, used according to the weather and the hour. Even without affordable window glass, interiors were not necessarily places of complete darkness. Light found several paths indoors. It entered through open doors, courtyards, and roof openings. It reflected from pale plaster, polished surfaces, light-colored cloth, and sunlit walls outside. Lamps and fires added their own warm circles during cloudy weather and after sunset. Rooms could also be placed and used according to the light they received. Storage spaces might remain dim and cool, while work was carried out where daylight was strongest. A room with a fire had to balance warmth and illumination with the need to release smoke. Sleeping spaces could be more enclosed. A dwelling was not one uniform environment. It was a collection of spaces, each managing daylight, warmth, air, weather, and privacy in a slightly different way. Into this varied world came window glass. In parts of the Roman world, glass panes appeared in some houses, villas, baths, and public structures. Their presence did not mean that every Roman home suddenly acquired bright, transparent windows. Glass remained costly, and glazed openings were concentrated in buildings whose owners or institutions could afford them. The panes themselves were unlike the broad, clear sheets familiar today. Roman window glass could be cast or formed by other methods. The resulting pieces were often small, thick, tinted, or uneven by modern standards. Their surfaces might carry ripples and marks from shaping and cooling. Such glass admitted light, but it usually did not offer a perfectly clear outward view. Imagine a room beside a courtyard in a prosperous Roman house. A small pane closes an opening in the wall. Morning has reached the courtyard outside, yet its forms are softened by the glass. The outlines of walls, plants, and passing figures appear hazy. Straight edges seem to waver slightly across the uneven surface. The purpose of the pane is not merely to provide a view. Its great value lies in separating the room from the open air, while still allowing daylight to enter. If rain begins, drops tick quietly against the protected opening. The floor beneath remains dry. A cold breeze no longer passes so freely into the room. The courtyard's pale glow continues to spread across the interior, even while the weather remains outside. This is a modest change, but a meaningful one. The wall can be closed without becoming entirely dark. Light can enter while some measure of rain, wind, dust, insects, smoke, and noise is held back. Yet glazing does not solve every problem. A fixed glass pane admits daylight, but it does not provide ventilation. Fresh air still requires a door, an uncovered opening, or some part of the window that can be opened. In warm conditions, an enclosed room may hold unwanted heat. Bright sunlight may need to be softened by a curtain or screen. Privacy may still depend on cloth, shutters, screens, or careful placement of the opening. Windows then were only one part of environmental control. Wall thickness, curtains, shutters, screens, fires, courtyards, and the placement of rooms continued to matter. Glass joined these older methods, rather than replacing them all at once. For most households, the familiar shutter remained useful and dependable. It could be opened to welcome daylight and moving air, then closed when shelter became more important. Its movement belonged to the ordinary work of the day. In another building, perhaps a villa, a bath, or a public structure, a small pane of glass offered a different rhythm. It remained in place while the weather changed beyond it. Clouds passed, and the light dimmed. The sun returned, and the pane held a pale brightness. Figures crossed the courtyard outside, their shapes blurred by the thick, wavering surface. This softened light had a character of its own. It did not make the wall disappear. It did not turn the outdoors into a sharp picture. Instead, it transformed the opening into a luminous patch, a quiet area of brightness set into stone or plaster. One could know that the morning had brightened without seeing every detail beyond the wall. One could notice a shadow passing, the motion of leaves, or the fading of a cloud. The pane carried news of the day through changes in light, rather than through perfect clarity. Beyond the glass, rain might continue to fall. Its steady tapping would mark the minutes while the household carried on inside. Cloth could be folded. Vessels could be arranged. Food, medicines, or oils could be inspected and stored. The protected opening allowed some of this work to continue in natural light, even when the weather was unsettled. Still, across many generations, most wall openings would continue to be covered in older ways. Glassmaking required fuel, skill, suitable raw materials, and careful handling. Panes could break. Broad, flat sheets were difficult to make, and glass was not a standard feature in every home. Builders therefore worked with relatively small pieces where glass was available, and where its cost could be justified. Elsewhere, shutters, cloth screens, doors, courtyards, and roof openings continued to guide daylight into rooms. Change came gradually. No single material answered every need, and no single design suited every place. An open shutter offered both light and air, but little protection. A closed shutter offered shelter, but left the room dim. Cloth and screens softened the opening without fully sealing it. Horn and translucent stone admitted a muted glow where they were practical. Glass allowed daylight through a more weather-resistant barrier, though it could not bring fresh air unless the opening itself could also be opened. Each arrangement carried its own compromise, and so the room at dawn can be imagined in more than one form. In one home, a hand lifts a wooden latch and folds back the shutter. Cool air moves across the floor, carrying the sounds of the waking street. Work begins while the weather is mild. Later, if rain gathers, the shutter closes, and the room becomes darker. In another building, morning reaches a small, uneven pane. The opening remains covered. Rain touches the outer surface, yet a quiet brightness enters. The courtyard beyond is not clearly visible. It appears only as a gentle arrangement of color, shadow, and movement. Within the room, the plaster catches that light and gives it back softly. A bowl gains a faint highlight along its rim. The wooden table emerges from shadow. On the shelf, a glass bottle holds a small reflection of the pale opening. The early pane offers no perfect view and no complete answer to comfort. It is thick, irregular, and limited in size, yet it expresses a lasting idea. A wall can remain closed and still admit the day. Generations of makers would gradually learn to produce broader, flatter sheets of glass. Builders would fit panes more regularly into buildings, and rooms would increasingly be arranged around the daylight they provided. For now, the window remains small. Rain continues to tick against its uneven surface. Beyond it, the courtyard rests in softened outline. Within, a pale and imperfect glow spreads slowly over the plaster, while morning quietly enters. Chapter 6. When Windows Became Part of the Home. Morning enters through a group of small leaded panes. Each piece of glass rests within a narrow framework. Together, the pieces form a quiet pattern of diamonds and gentle lines. The panes are not perfectly smooth. One is faintly green, another is almost colorless. A third contains a tiny bubble left behind by the glassmaker's work. Beyond the window, a tree moves in the wind. Its branches seem to bend as they pass behind the uneven glass, and the view ripples softly, like a reflection on calm water. For much of medieval Europe, windows like these were valuable. Glass was especially prominent in churches, monasteries, important civic buildings, and the residences of wealthy families. Some prosperous urban homes also had glazed windows, although domestic glazing remained unevenly available. It differed from region to region, from town to town, and from household to household. Many people continued to rely on shutters, cloth, or other coverings for generations. There was no single moment when glass entered the home. Instead, small panes appeared gradually, one building and one opening at a time. In churches, glass had already demonstrated that daylight could become part of architecture. Colored and painted pieces were joined by slender strips of lead. Light passing through these windows carried deep blues, warm reds, greens, and golds onto walls and floors. Figures and stories could be arranged within the pattern. In this way, transmitted daylight became both an image and a means of shaping the atmosphere of an interior. Domestic windows were usually simpler. Clear or lightly colored panes might be joined with lead strips or fitted into wooden frameworks. Because glassmakers could produce sheets of only a limited size, builders assembled many small pieces to cover a larger opening. The framework supported them, while the repeated arrangement turned a practical solution into an orderly pattern. The glass itself could be made in more than one way. Two important methods were known as cylinder glass and crown glass. These methods existed alongside one another. They do not form a simple sequence in which one permanently replaced the other. Their use depended on local skills, available equipment, cost, trade, and the kind of pane required. Cylinder glass began near the steady glow of a furnace. A glassblower gathered softened glass at the end of a hollow iron pipe. In the dim workshop, the material shone with a warm amber light. By blowing steadily and turning the pipe, the worker formed a bubble. Rather than leaving the bubble round, the glassblower stretched it into a longer shape. Gradually, it became a hollow tube. The ends were opened, and when the glass was ready, the tube was cut along its length. The curved tube was then reheated. As it softened, it began to relax and open. The rounded surface spread outward until it became a sheet. The transformation can be imagined simply. A tube opened along one side, warmed again, and gently unfolded until it lay nearly flat. Nearly flat, but not perfectly so. The stretching and flattening could leave long bubbles and soft waves within the surface. When placed in a window, cylinder glass might draw a straight roofline into a slight curve. A passing figure could appear longer or narrower when seen through different parts of the pane. The window admitted useful daylight, but it did not always provide an exact picture of the world beyond it. Crown glass was formed through a different motion. A blown bubble was transferred from the blowing pipe to another iron rod, called a contil. An opening was made in the bubble, and the glass was reheated. Then the worker began to spin the rod. As the glass turned, it opened outward. The movement spread the softened material into a wide, round disc. The motion was smooth, but required practice control. The glassblower kept the rod turning while the glowing disc widened near the furnace. Once cooled, the round sheet could be cut into smaller panes. Crown glass often retained circular patterns from the spinning. Curved bubbles followed the movement of the disc. The center was thicker where the pontil had been attached, leaving a rounded, raised area. Flatter portions away from the center could be cut into squares, rectangles, or diamonds for windows. Neither cylinder glass nor crown glass removed every irregularity. The finished pane still revealed something of the furnace, the pipe, the rod, and the maker's turning hands. Light crossing them was softened and redirected. Reflections shifted as someone walked past. On a windy day, the small pieces might tremble almost imperceptibly within their lead or wooden frames. These handmade surfaces gave a room a particular kind of daylight. It was not the perfectly clear light of a modern pane. It moved through faint color, curved bubbles, and gentle waves. It rested unevenly on plaster and timber. A bright patch might cross the floorboards, while the corners of the room remained quiet and dim. Over the early modern period, improved production and growing trade brought glazed windows into more urban and middle-ranking homes. The change was gradual, and its timing varied widely. A household in one town might have several glazed rooms, while another household elsewhere still closed its openings with wooden shutters. Even within one building, principal rooms might contain glass, while storage spaces in lesser chambers did not. As glazing became more common, it began to influence the way rooms were used. A closed shutter protected an interior from weather, but it also excluded much of the daylight. A glazed opening could hold back rain and wind, while allowing the pale morning light to spread across a floor. The wall remained closed, yet the room continued to share in the changing day. This did not mean that every glazed room became warm. A single pane conducts heat readily, allowing warmth to pass through it. Larger areas of glass could therefore increase heat loss. Frames and joints might admit drafts, and an imperfectly fitted pane could make a faint sound when the wind pressed against it. Shutters remained useful after glass had been installed. Curtains, wooden panels, careful framing, and well-fitted joints all helped with cold, privacy, and rough weather. Glass could separate the room from rain and wind while preserving light, but it could not manage every need by itself. Nor did glazing alone make a home clean. A closed window could reduce the entry of rain, soot, and outdoor dirt. Yet cleanliness depended on many other conditions, including ventilation, the fuel burned indoors, the nature of the flooring, local sanitation, and the steady labor needed to maintain a household. Glass changed the boundary between indoors and outdoors. It did not solve every difficulty at that boundary. More dependable daylight offered quiet possibilities. A chair could be placed near a window for sewing. A workbench could stand where a craftsperson could distinguish fine lines and small edges. A stairway might receive light from an opening above a landing. A table could be moved toward the brightest part of the room for writing, measuring, mending, or reading. As windows became larger or more numerous, daylight increasingly influenced room planning. Furniture could be arranged in relation to the sun. Morning tasks might take place near one opening, while afternoon work moved toward another. The window was no longer merely a gap in the wall. It became a point around which useful space could be organized. From the later 17th century onward, another form of window became influential in Britain and in regions shaped by British building traditions. This was the sash window. Instead of opening outward on hinges, sections of a sash window slid vertically within a frame. Counterweights were connected to the moving sections by cords. These weights balanced much of the load, allowing a person to raise or lower part of the window without lifting the full burden of wood and glass directly. The design allowed ventilation while using the wall opening efficiently. The lower section could be raised or the upper section lowered. Its cords, joints, and weights required care, and when wind moved around the building, the sash might answer with a gentle rattle. Rows of sash windows also gave a building front a measured rhythm. Glass, frame, wall, and then glass again. From the street, the openings appeared orderly. Within, they admitted broad areas of pale light. Larger and more numerous windows gradually altered both interiors and streets. A house could present a more regular face toward the road. Inside, daylight reached farther across ceilings, walls, and floors. Window seats, writing desks, work tables, and reading chairs gathered near the clearest openings. Yet this was not a universal pattern, nor did it unfold at the same pace everywhere. This history concerns particular developments in medieval and early modern Europe. Other societies built for light, shade, heat, cold, privacy, and weather, according to their own surroundings and architectural traditions. Even within Europe, there was no steady path carrying every household from dim rooms to brighter ones. Glazing spread through a changing mixture of skill, trade, wealth, climate, fashion, and practical need. Its cost and availability continued to differ from one place and family to another. Where a new pane was fitted, however, a subtle change became possible. Rain traced the outer surface instead of entering the room. Wind pressed against the glass, while papers rested undisturbed within. The view might bend through waves and bubbles, but the sky remained visible. Morning could enter without requiring the wall to stand open. Now, at a work table near the window, a sheet of paper catches the best of the afternoon light. Ink darkens the tip of a pen. Beside it lie a length of thread, a small tool, and an open book. The pane above the table offers no perfectly sharp view. The roofs beyond it seem to sway gently in the handmade glass. A branch curves as it crosses one of the small leaded sections. When the wind rises, the window gives a quiet rattle and then becomes still again. Enough light enters to reveal a fine line of handwriting, the edge of a needle, and the closely set letters on the page. Daylight crosses the floorboards and comes to rest beside the open book. And as people brought reading and careful work nearer to the window, another use for glass became increasingly valuable. A small, curved, polished piece could gather and bend that same daylight, helping the eye distinguish what was fine, faint, or very small. Chapter 7. Glass, Books, and Clearer Sight. At the work table beside the window, daylight rests across an open book. The paper is slightly uneven, and the ink has settled into its fibers. Some letters are broad and dark. Others are small, with fine strokes that ask the eye to look closely. A hand places a rounded piece of glass upon the page. Beneath it, the letters appear larger. The curved surface changes the direction of the light passing through it. This bending of light is called refraction. When the curve is carefully shaped, it can make a nearby object appear enlarged or help bring an image into focus. The idea is simple, although making a useful lens is not. Its curvature must be carefully controlled. Its surface must be ground and polished until it is smooth. If the shape is uneven or the surface imperfect, the view may become blurred or distorted. So the work proceeds patiently. Shape the glass, polish it, test it, and look again. Among the earliest aids for close reading were objects now called reading stones. These were rounded magnifiers placed directly upon a manuscript. As the stone moved along a line of writing, the enlarged letters seemed to travel beneath it. The reader did not wear the device. Instead, a hand guided it slowly across the page, pausing over a word, then moving onward. Such a tool belonged to a long and varied history of experimenting with transparent materials, curved surfaces, and sight. The history of lenses involved several regions, several crafts, and several kinds of glass. No single workshop was responsible for every step. Knowledge developed gradually through the experience of glassmakers, polishers, frame makers, readers, and others who learned how a smooth curve could guide light. In Europe, wearable spectacles appeared in the late 13th century. The exact identity of their first inventor remains uncertain. Later stories sometimes attach the invention to a particular person or place, but the surviving evidence does not offer one simple answer. Spectacles emerged from skills and ideas that have been developing over time, supported by many hands whose names are no longer known. The earliest spectacles looked different from most pairs worn today. They generally used two convex lenses, meaning lenses that curved outward. The paired lenses were held before the eyes or balanced upon the nose. They did not yet have the familiar side arms extending toward the ears. Convex lenses assist many people who, with age, find it more difficult to focus on nearby objects. This change often arrives gradually. A page that was once comfortable to read may need to be held farther away. Fine stitches may become less distinct. Figures in an account book may seem to gather together, especially as the daylight fades. A suitable lens can help the eye bring those close details into focus. For many wearers, spectacles extended useful close vision. A reader could once again distinguish small letters. A scribe might continue forming careful lines of text. A merchant could examine records, while a skilled artisan might see the edge of a tool or the details of a design more clearly. The effect should not be imagined as universal. Early lenses could not correct every difficulty of sight, and spectacles did not extend every person's working life, nor could everyone obtain them. Literacy was socially uneven, as was access to books. Skilled lens makers and useful lenses were not available equally in every place or to every household. The practical benefits of spectacles followed the uneven paths of education, craft, trade, and wealth. Still, for those who could use them, spectacles offered a quiet form of assistance. They did not replace the eye. They worked with it, changing the path of light before it entered. A small piece of shaped glass could make the difference between a blurred page and a readable one, between an uncertain line and a visible detail. Later, lens forms also helped people who could see nearby objects clearly, but found distant ones indistinct. Spectacles became useful for more kinds of vision. Their frames changed as well, becoming easier to wear and more secure. Over time, what had once been held carefully before the face became a familiar companion, resting lightly near the eyes. The making of lenses remained exacting work. A lens grinder slowly shaped a small piece of glass to produce the desired curve. Polishing removed roughness and made the surface smooth. The finished lens then had to be inspected and tested. Even a slight difference in curvature could alter the image. The quality of the glass mattered, but it was only one part of the craft. Clear glass from Venice played a role in optical work, as did glass and skills from other places. Yet clear Venetian glass alone did not invent spectacles. The history depended on several regions, several materials, and many kinds of knowledge. Curvature mattered, smoothness mattered, frame making mattered. So did the practical understanding that different eyes required different forms of help. From the quiet scale of the page, lenses eventually carried human sight in two opposite directions. One direction led outward, toward things extremely far away. Telescopes combined glass lenses so that distant subjects could appear nearer or more distinct. The other direction led inward, toward things extremely small. Microscopes also combined lenses, enlarging subjects that the unaided eye could not examine in detail. Reading stones, magnifying glasses, spectacles, telescopes, and microscopes are related through their use of curved, transparent surfaces, yet they are distinct devices, designed for different distances and purposes. A reading stone enlarges the writing directly beneath it. A magnifying glass enlarges a nearby object. Spectacles help the eye bring an image into focus. A telescope assists the study of distant subjects. A microscope enlarges something very close and very small. None of these instruments offered a perfectly clear or entirely objective window onto the world. Early lenses could produce colored fringes, blur, and misleading shapes. An imperfect curve might stretch an image or make an edge appear doubled. Light might gather where it did not belong. A flaw in the glass could seem for a moment like a feature of the object being studied. Better glass, more accurate shaping, and finer polishing reduced some of these problems. Even so, every image required interpretation. The observer had to remember that the lens itself could influence what appeared beyond it. By the 17th century, microscopes were making insect parts, plant tissues, and tiny organisms available for detailed observation. A specimen could be placed beneath a lens, ready to receive the light. Then a focus screw might be adjusted quietly, moving part of the instrument by a very small amount. At first, the view might contain only brightness and shadow. With another gentle adjustment, an edge would become distinct. Lines, fibers, delicate joints, or tiny forms might gradually emerge. Yet the instrument did not create knowledge by itself. Someone had to prepare the specimen. It had to be positioned carefully so that light could pass through it or fall across its surface. The observer had to adjust the focus, compare one view with another, and decide whether a shape belonged to the specimen or to an imperfection in the lens. Patient observers drew what they saw. They described patterns, colors, movements, and proportions. Others prepared similar specimens and looked through different instruments. They compared results, repeated observations, and debated what the images meant. A lens could make something visible, but visibility was only the beginning. Understanding depended upon careful preparation, repeated comparison, clear description, and thoughtful interpretation. The same caution applied to telescopes. A distant image might be changed by the lens, by the surrounding air, or by the expectations of the person looking. Improvements in clarity and lens making could reduce distortion, but they could not remove the need for judgment. Optical instruments did not reveal a perfectly objective world. Shaped glass affected the view, and human perception gave that view meaning. Rather than lessening the value of lenses, this uncertainty encouraged habits of care. To look through glass was also to ask how the glass might be shaping what was seen. Observation became a patient practice of focusing, comparing, describing, and looking again. Meanwhile, spectacles continued their quieter work in homes, shops, libraries, and workshops. Their influence was often personal rather than grand. A lens did not need to reveal a distant world or a tiny organism to be useful. It might simply help someone read a familiar passage, examine a column of numbers, repair a small object, or guide a thread through cloth. At the table beside the window, the afternoon light slowly withdraws from the page. The letters that seemed clear a short while ago begin to soften into the dimness. Close work now requires another kind of help. A lamp is brought near. Its flame casts a warm circle across the open book. The spectacles are removed and set down beside the page. For a moment, the small light appears again in each polished lens, reflected as two steady points. Beyond that circle, evening settles gently around the room. Within it, glass, paper, and flame remain quietly joined, and the lamplight resting in the spectacle lenses suggests another task that glass had learned to perform. It could do more than bend light for the eye. It could shelter a flame, allowing it to burn more steadily through the deepening evening. Chapter 8: Lanterns, Lamps, and Safer Light. The lamp beside the open book gave only a modest light, yet within its warm circle, a page could be read, a needle threaded, and careful work continued. The flame was small. Much of its usefulness came from the glass arranged around it. For most of human history, an open flame was easily disturbed. A draft beneath a door might make a candle flicker. An outdoor wind could extinguish it. A lantern offered a partial answer, placing a candle or oil flame inside an enclosure that softened moving air. Openings still admitted fresh air and released smoke, so the lantern could not be sealed. Yet its walls sheltered the flame and made light easier to carry. Before glass became affordable, makers used pierced metal, which let points and patterns of light escape, or thin horn prepared until translucent. These materials admitted a muted glow, but little clear view. Glass changed the balance. A transparent panel shielded the flame while allowing more brightness into a room, stable, street, or ship. As production expanded and costs fell, small panes held in sturdy frames became practical for more people, even when the glass was not perfectly smooth or clear. Lanterns could be carried between rooms, through stables, and around workshops after daylight left the windows. They also served streets, ships, and later railway stations. Their forms varied, but each relied on the same partnership, a living flame sheltered behind glass. The stationary oil lamp developed this partnership further. A reservoir held fuel, and a wick drew oil upward. Raising or lowering the wick changed the flame size. Above the burner stood a shaped glass chimney. As the flame warmed the air, heated air rose through this vertical tube and drew fresh air toward the wick from below. The resulting flow supplied oxygen more steadily, making the flame brighter and more even. The chimney also guided smoke and heat upward and offered protection from moderate drafts. Such a lamp could be safer than an exposed flame in certain conditions, but it was never simply safe. Oil and later kerosene could spill. A lamp could be knocked over. Smoke and fumes could gather in a poorly ventilated room. Flame might burn hands or ignite nearby material. The chimney became extremely hot and could crack if struck or exposed to a sudden change in temperature. Care remained essential. The wick needed trimming, soot had to be cleaned from the chimney, and fuel had to be poured attentively. The lamp belonged on a stable surface, away from curtains, paper, and anything else that might catch fire. Glass reduced some risks, while demanding its own caution. A clear reservoir showed how much oil remained without opening the lamp. Globes could soften and spread brightness, while shades directed it down toward a table or workbench. These forms also helped keep nearby objects from touching the flame. The improvement of evening light did not come from glass alone. Better fuels burned more evenly, improved burners controlled fuel and air, and reliable wicks carried fuel at a suitable rate. Chimneys shaped airflow, sheltered flame, and guided heat. Public systems mattered too. A street lantern was useful only when someone filled, cleaned, lit, and repaired it. Later gas and electric lights still used glass in globes, shades, and protective forms. New lamps did not reach every household quickly. A refined design available in a prosperous town might remain uncommon in a distant village, and fuel supplies differed by place. Many families continued using candles, hearth light, or older oil lamps. Change entered ordinary life unevenly, one room and region at a time. Where better lamps arrived, however, reading, sewing, mending, cooking, bookkeeping, and visiting could continue in a steadier pool of light after sunset. Shops could remain open later, and illuminated streets became easier to follow after dusk. Artificial light also had a less comfortable consequence. In factories and large workshops, it allowed labor beyond hours once set by the sun, making the working day longer and more tightly controlled. Lighting was not only a story of comfort. The same glow that gave a reader another chapter could give a worker another required hour. Still, in a household room, the change could feel quiet and practical. A lamp stood on a table, its shade placing light where it was needed, while corners remained dim. Within the glow, hands could finish a familiar task before rest. A flame behind clear or clouded glass became a settled center, touching the edge of a table, the curve of a chair, and the polished surface of a bottle. Outside the home, glass helped light communicate as well as illuminate. Railway lanterns used colored glass to turn one ordinary flame into distinct signals. To people who knew the agreed meanings, color conveyed an instruction from a distance. On a dim platform, a worker could. Chapter 9. Bottles in an Industrial Age. The workshops that supplied clear chimneys and globes for lamps also produced bottles, jars, and many smaller containers. Their furnaces glowed through long hours, warming rooms filled with pipes, molds, tools, and rows of cooling vessels. Glassmaking still depended on heat, timing, and practiced attention. Yet the scale of the work was changing. More people wanted glass, and they wanted it in reliable, familiar forms. For centuries, a glassblower had shaped each bottle by turning a pipe, breathing gently into hot glass, and guiding the softened material with simple tools. No two vessels were exactly alike. One bottle might lean slightly at the neck, another might be thicker on one side, or hold a little more than its neighbor. These variations gave handmade glass its individual character, but they could make packing, sealing, and measuring less predictable. As trade expanded, merchants and manufacturers placed greater value on uniformity. Bottles of a similar height could stand together in orderly crates. Necks of a consistent width could accept the same cork or stopper. A known capacity made it easier to sell liquids in agreed quantities. Gradually, production moved towards standardized shapes, first through improved molds, and later through machines. A mold was a hollow form, often made of metal. It enclosed the soft glass and gave it a repeated outline. A worker gathered a glowing lump of molten glass on the end of a blowpipe, then placed it inside the open mold. When the worker blew through the pipe, the glass expanded until it reached the mold's inner walls. The surface cooled just enough to hold its new form. Then the mold opened, revealing a bottle that was still hot and needed further work around its neck. This method preserved the glassblower's breath as part of the process, while making the body of each vessel more regular. Letters, patterns, and company names could also be cut into the mold. These appeared as raised marks on the finished glass. A bottle could announce its maker even after a paper label had faded or washed away. Its identity was carried quietly in the material itself. Molds allowed bottles to take shapes suited to particular uses. Some were round and strong, able to resist pressure from sparkling drinks. Others were square or rectangular, fitting neatly into boxes and cupboards. Medicine bottles often had narrow necks for careful pouring. Wide-mouthed jars made room for spoons, fingers, or preserved pieces of fruit. Color also served a purpose. Dark green or amber glass helped shield certain contents from strong light, while clear glass displayed color and clarity. The shade came partly from the ingredients used in making the glass. Small amounts of iron could lend a greenish tone, especially when the raw materials were not highly purified. Other minerals produced brown, blue, or deeper green glass. Clear glass required careful selection and treatment of its ingredients, and it was often more highly valued. Yet colored glass had practical advantages. Light can slowly alter some foods, drinks, and medicines. A darker bottle served like a permanent shade drawn around its contents, softening the light that reached what was stored within. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, machinery took over more of the shaping process. Early machines still required workers to feed them hot glass, remove bottles, inspect the finished pieces, and manage the furnaces. Later systems divided streams of molten glass into measured portions called gobs. Each gob was a soft, glowing piece containing about enough material for one container. It dropped into a mold, where compressed air and mechanical movements formed it into a bottle. In a fully automatic bottle machine, several steps continued in a steady cycle. A first mold created a rough, hollow shape. A second mold expanded that shape into its final form. The bottle then traveled onward to cool gradually. This slow and controlled cooling was essential. If the outer surface cooled much faster than the interior, stresses could remain trapped in the glass, making it more likely to crack. Bottles therefore passed through a long, heated chamber in which the temperature declined gently. This process, known as annealing, allowed the material to settle into a stronger and more stable condition. The result was not simply a greater number of bottles, it was a new degree of reliability. Beverage producers could order thousands of containers designed for the same cap or cork. Pharmacies could stock recognizable sizes. Food companies could prepare labels made to fit each jar. Crates, filling equipment, shelves, and transport systems could all be designed around repeated dimensions. In kitchens and pantries, glass jars became trusted household objects. They held jams, pickles, sauces, fruit, vegetables, and dry ingredients. Their transparency offered a simple advantage. The contents remained visible. Someone opening a cupboard could see whether a jar held beans, sugar, cherries, or preserves without removing its lid. The level could be checked at a glance, and changes in color or appearance were easier to notice. Glass did not add a strong taste or smell to most foods. Its smooth surface was relatively easy to wash, and it did not readily absorb oils or stains. When paired with a dependable seal, a jar could protect food from dust, insects, and outside moisture. In home canning, food was heated in jars and then sealed. As the contents cooled, the air inside contracted, helping to draw the lid firmly into place. This did not make food permanent, and safe preservation still required careful methods. Even so, it could greatly extend the useful life of seasonal produce. A shelf of preserves held more than a row of containers. It represented summer fruit carried into colder months, cucumbers kept as pickles, and garden vegetables waiting in clear vessels. Glass made this store visible. Reds, greens, golds, and deep purples remained behind smooth walls, arranged along the quiet shelves of a pantry. Beverage bottles traveled farther. They carried mineral water, milk, beer, wine, soft drinks, and many other liquids through widening systems of distribution. Stronger and more uniform bottles could be filled, sealed, packed, and transported in large quantities. Some were intended to be returned, washed, inspected, and filled again. A thick reusable bottle might make many journeys between a household, a shop, and a bottling works. This circulation required organization. Bottles had to be collected and sorted. Chipped or cracked ones were removed. The rest were cleaned with hot water and suitable washing solutions. Standard shapes made the work easier, while embossed names could help ensure that each bottle returned to its original company. Deposits encouraged customers to bring empty containers back instead of discarding them. Bottles moved outward while full, returned while empty, and began the cycle again. Milk bottles became a particularly familiar example. Before sealed bottles were common, milk was often delivered in larger cans and poured into a household's own jug. A clear, closed bottle reduced handling and helped protect the milk during delivery. Its contents could be seen, its quantity could be measured, its opening could be covered. In the early morning, rows of bottles might wait quietly at doorsteps, their pale contents visible in the changing light. Medicine entered a new age of containers as well. Pharmacies had long relied on glass because it could hold liquids without contributing the flavors associated with wood, leather, or some metals. Industrial production made small medicine bottles more plentiful and consistent. Labels could state the contents, dosage, maker, and warnings. Narrow openings helped control pouring, while droppers allowed very small amounts to be measured. The bottle alone could not make medicine safe. Accurate formulas, clean preparation, honest labeling, and careful use were all necessary. Yet the containers supported these practices. A sealed glass vessel protected a liquid from dust and casual contact. A clear bottle allowed a pharmacist to inspect it. Amber glass guarded preparations that could be altered by light. Standard capacities made measuring more dependable. Laboratories depended on glass for similar reasons. Their shelves held flasks, tubes, jars, measuring cylinders, and bottles fitted with stoppers. Some vessels were made from glass formulated to endure changes in temperature or resist chemical attack. Marks along the sides indicated volume. Curved tubes guided liquids or gases from one place to another. Transparent walls allowed researchers to observe a color changing, a solid settling, or bubbles rising through a solution. This was another form of seeing through glass. A laboratory vessel did not merely hold matter, it made a process visible while keeping it contained. The same broad quality that admitted daylight through a window and allowed lamplight through a chimney now supported close observation at a workbench. Industrial glassmaking remained deeply dependent on human attention. Workers prepared raw materials, managed intense furnaces, maintained molds, moved containers, inspected finished pieces, and packed them for shipment. Heat and noise accompanied the work, even as machines introduced a steadier rhythm. A finished bottle might appear simple, but behind it stood a linked system of mining, transport, fuel, engineering, skilled maintenance, and patient inspection. Defective bottles had to be recognized. Tiny cracks, uneven walls, or poorly formed rims could weaken a container or prevent it from sealing. Inspectors watched bottles pass before bright backgrounds, searching for bubbles, stones, folds, and other flaws. Over time, mechanical and optical devices joined this task. The purpose remained unchanged. An ordinary vessel had to be dependable. That dependability helped glass settle more deeply into daily life. Bottles no longer belonged chiefly to wealthy tables, specialist workshops, or apothecary shelves. They stood in kitchens and cafes, dairies and clinics, laboratories and railway refreshment rooms. They waited in crates, traveled in carts and trucks, and returned to washing lines. Jars accumulated in cupboards, where they were often reused. One might hold buttons, another nails or seeds. Others kept tea, dry ingredients, or leftovers. Industrial production did not remove glass from human routines. It placed glass more fully within them. The old qualities remained. Glass was hard, smooth, and often transparent. It could preserve a boundary between the contents of a vessel and the world outside. A material once shaped slowly into rare objects could now appear in thousands of homes, in forms so familiar that they attracted little notice. On a pantry shelf, the transformation seemed quiet. A bottle of milk stood beside a jar of preserves and a small brown container of medicine. Each had begun near the glow of a furnace. Each had taken shape in a mold and cooled through a carefully regulated passage. Each protected something different. Through clear glass, the household could see what remained. Behind amber walls, the reach of light was softened. In orderly rows, these modest vessels held the products of farms, factories, pharmacies, and distant trade, keeping the materials of everyday life gathered within their smooth and durable walls.